already is live. Epic. So let me actually share the screen. Sweet. All right. So today we want to look at a proposal to convert some of the configuration options APIs that ASP.NET 5 added, and it's probably helpful if one of you guys could give an overview of what ASP.NET created and what part of the convergence plan is at a very high level before we go into the actual APIs.
Okay. How to describe this? When we started working on ASP.NET 5, we realized that we wanted to create a new configuration system that was lightweight and was very flexible and had the ability to merge configuration values from different sources instead of having just, let's say, an XML file that is fixed in your application. You could basically bring configuration from environment variables, from XML files, from JSON files, in files, and different sources. Okay. So we created a bunch of abstractions and implementation for a very simple configuration system. When we were building it, we realized that this was probably more general purpose like just ASP.NET 5. The same happened with many other components, and we started putting together DNX, what is called DNX now. One characteristic of the design is that we didn't want to have any magic. Basically, there is no like static state, global state, or anything. If you want to read from configuration, you need to create an instance of the class, call a method to get the values, and if you want to wire up that configuration to your application, you need to do that explicitly. Okay. There's no magic that you can get configuration from anywhere and then just read it and place in your application. You have to be very explicit about it. Okay. The general system, if you want to show some of the sample code.
Yeah, it's probably easier. Just share the screen again. I actually did pull up the.
If you look at the second snippet that is not just above, sorry, where it says within a value, you can see that there is an indexer to get the value. And the key of that value is like a string with some delimiters. So basically, the whole configuration system works based on key values, where the key can have some structure. So it has a system with delimiters, and you can store this kind of key anywhere in any of the sources. You can have an environment variable that has its name. Because of the placing of the semicolons, you can have another environment variable that is called data, something else, like, let's say, provider. And they both belong into the same section because they are both under data. But the way this is stored is as key values. So we have a system that reasons about the sections and how they are organized, but the way it's stored is actually just key values.
I have a quick question. If I don't call build, will you call it implicitly later? Is build basically just an optimization? Like, I'm done now, please build whatever database you need to build, such that it doesn't happen later when I'm actually executing requests, or I have to call build?
Right now, what it does is basically until you call build, every of the other methods is returning an I configuration builder. So it's basically mutating the I configuration builder and returning it. Build returns the actual I configuration. So it's basically I'm done building it.
So basically, I wouldn't have an API to actually get the configuration value, I guess.
Yeah, that's all it does. It says, hey, you're done, then I give you the I configuration.
So the type that a JSON file that environment variables return is different from the one that build returns. So you can't accidentally forget the call because you have the.
It's kind of a string builder and then two strings.
Yeah, makes sense. And then I guess the idea is you want to unify essentially multiple different representations, like JSON, INI files, I guess, environment variables, and the lowest common denominator is essentially like the key value pairs that you have. And there's some convention that I guess is specific to each provider, right? Like how INI files, for example, deal with hierarchies is probably different from how a JSON file would represent that.
Yes, but they all end up being the same key value pairs, so that if you have a system where you, for instance, have a config JSON file and you have environment variables, the last one will win. If you have the same key values in both, the environment variables will win in this case.
So because the order in which I add the providers is the one that determines which one wins, right?
That's how you configure the order of which ability order.
And
Order, whatever.
And this code is going to appear in the application. It's not that we have a convention on which one wins. It's basically you have to write it that way, and of course provide it in the default templates.
Yes. So there's no ambient configuration builder that is implicitly configured. I basically have to manually move it up all the time. So yeah. And then the other question I have is, like, I guess for the consumer, it's transparent which provider provided the data, right? I just always use the same syntax for. In your case, I guess it's colon delimited. So it's not that I have to know whether it's a colon or a backslash, right? It's always a colon regardless of what the provider was, right?
Yes. Yes. Once you have it in the chain and you call build, you simply can start getting and setting also keyword inverse. So the setter, actually, the code for setting writing a value to memory is outdated. We decided a couple of days ago that we are removing the setter in favor of just the indexer syntax. So you basically set the indexer.
So you can still do it, it's just different syntax.
Yeah. And
remind me, setter just changes value in memory. It doesn't actually update the store, correct? So next time I create new configuration builder and build, the value is going to be gone.
Yes. And the idea we have for the long term is that we are going to have a way to commit this. So there's going to be an interface that some providers can implement that allows you to commit the value to be persistent. And then what we will do is basically we enumerate the chain again, like backwards, and we say the first one that implements this interface we would call commit.
And will there be a difference between the indexer setter and this set and commit? You see, the thing is that today, if set is a method, you can add an overload that takes a parameter, and I say, yeah, commit it. If you can commit it, commit it. If it's an indexer, you cannot have additional parameters.
We haven't thought about it that way. I think that the plan is to basically have a separate commit method. So right now, if
you would have to basically set bunch of. I see.
Yes.
If you want to do it in bulk instead of doing it, set it. Maybe that makes more.
Right now, what it does is you call set. You know that if you then call get for the same key on the same instance, you get the value that you set. But if you start the application again, it's not there. But that is going to be a separate feature.
Cool. And then the sections are essentially just these intermediate containers, right? There will be one section for data, there will be one section for default connection, I guess, right?
Yes. A great mental model for how this works is the registry. Basically, when you have a group in the registry, you have one of those folders, and that's basically a section, and you can have multiple values that are under our settings, for instance, in this example. You could have like our settings column, background color, foreground color.
So a section essentially can contain other sections. So
and other values, another.
Yep. Right, that makes sense.
And another characteristic of these APIs is that it's just a way to manage strings. So it's a very low level and low tech thing that will just give you access to strings that get stored in the configuration system. If you want to convert those strings to something else that your application can use, if you have an integrated date or something, or timestamp, you would need to parse it. Now there is this higher level componentized options that has the ability to do some of that for you. But the implementation uses a reflection, which makes it not completely general purpose.
So there's only strings in this
In the configuration system, there are only strings.
Okay. This one is, I guess, the high level API that you referred to, right?
Yeah. This is basically putting together all the pieces. This is using this code snippets are using the DI system from DNS. So what you are doing there is you have the services, which is the iService collection object, and you call an extension method to say, okay, configure options for based on this class app settings, and go read from the section in configuration that is called app settings. And what this is going to be to do is basically it's going to create a service that is going to attach to that section and is going to be able to map by convention the different keys or the values in that section to the properties that are named with the same name in the app settings object.
This is where the reflection piece comes in, right?
Yes. Then there is another code. The second example there is doing the same thing but just using code. Instead of reading from configuration, you set up a delegate that is going to set the value on that object. So what this is doing is basically adding a service in our service collection that will do that for you. It's not executing the code immediately. Mm-hmm. So later on, if you want to access an option, you basically use dependency injection. So let's say that you have in the constructor an I options of that class. A dependency injection is going to take care of giving you an instance of that service, and that service is going to give you the ability to collect all the other places where you configure things based on that class. And it's going to execute all the delegates, it's going to go read from configuration, and it's going to give you the aggregate of doing all those operations. So basically, you also have a system here where the last one is going to win. You can configure multiple delegates, and they are going to get executed when you try to access the actual options property on the I options.
And then in the when you're passing the lambda, you can actually, instead of saying it equals to blue, you can say configuration.get key of blah, right? You can you use a configuration object at that point in that lambda? Like services.configure of app settings you pay as scopes to, as a background color. Can you say the value of that? Can you say get it from the configuration system?
You could, yeah, you could. Okay. But then you are basically putting in your lambda, you are putting an access to the configuration, you are capturing the configuration there.
Yes, but I was thinking of cases where you don't want to do the reflection. You could still do explicitly setting the keys without having to go through reflection.
Yes, it just requires more code.
Fair enough, but
it is a viable option. So
this just real quick, the capital C configuration and is that some ambient thing, or is it just something allotted for the sample? Or?
In the code where this is coming from, this example is coming from, it's a property.
Okay.
But I guess that comes from the template, right? That's the
yes, the startup.cs file in ASP.NET.
Any more questions? Otherwise, we probably should just look at the APIs. Also, for the folks online, if you have any questions, just ask them in the Google Hangouts tool, and I will try my best to actually answer them. If I don't, then I just suck at it. Sometimes that happens that I miss that question.
I don't know if my explanation of how configuration works, options work, was very clear.
Well, I guess that's something where again, at least in my case, I probably have to look at some APIs. All these things wired together. I don't know whether anybody else has more questions on that.
So, by the way, one of the things that we have been talking about in this working group is that options is designed to work well with the I, but there is only a tiny piece in it that really depends on dependency injection, which is the configure method. Mm-hmm. Everything else could be used in a different way. Especially you could wire up options using, let's say, code generation in a different kind of application that doesn't have the I. Makes sense.
So I'm actually trying to switch this to here. That's basically what you've sent me. So this is, I guess, all of it, right?
Yeah, I think that the good place to start would be configuration abstractions.
This guy here?
Yeah, you can scroll down to that one, I configuration. So that is the fundamental interface in configuration. That is basically an interface that gives you access to configuration values. and it has the indexer that we talk about. It also has currently we have some pending renames here. This get configuration section is going to be renamed to get section. That is basically give me this child group of configuration values under this key name. There are also APIs to enumerate the children, the child configuration sections. API to set the values. Well, it's basically we are actually removing some of that in favor of the indexer. There is a try get method also that has functionality that basically you can use it to tell the difference between a value that is actually set to null in configuration from something that is not set.
So if you index with a key that's not there, instead of getting a key not found exception, you just return null. Are the keys case sensitive, case insensitive?
Insensitive.
Insensitive.
Well, I guess it depends on the implementation, right?
Yeah, in the current implementation, they are insensitive. And it's kind of important.
Yeah, because like on Unix, right, like environment variables are case sensitive. So you could have two environment variables with the same name, different casing, and then the question is like, what does lookup do? So will the get method stay around, or is that going to go away when you remove set?
The current plan is to remove it.
Okay.
As well. That's use an indexer or target.
So one thing I don't know if we want to take a note, Imo, kind of emailing for you. We met on Friday, and we decided to kind of postpone the discussion on interfaces versus abstract classes for its kind of dedicated session, like do API architecture team meeting and talk about this. But maybe you can take a note about this.
There's also a general pending issue on the namespace for this. When we were developing the NX, we put everything that we thought was general purpose under Microsoft framework.
But that one is a separate kind of track. We already closed on this. We're gonna change all. Yeah, it's gonna be. Well, we decided that it's not gonna be Microsoft framework. But then what it will be is kind of on case by case basis. Okay, if we feel like this API is completely general purpose, we just put it in system configuration something. Probably that's what I would suggest.
What was the rationale behind having the indexer not throw on the getter when the key's not found and returning null?
It's more convenient to use.
Okay.
Basically, you are using this API to read from multiple sources, but you don't really know what is there, and you don't want to have to write a lot of defensive code. So if something is not configured, you will take a default in the application code.
Why would you use try get then? Can you just compare it to null if you wanted to sort of try to get it?
Lou, do you have an answer for that?
Because you may need to know that it was not there.
Null can mean two things. You can find out there.
How does null actually, like if these things are strings, how do I represent the null string in a configuration? Like how do I set in a JSON file or an environment variable a thing that says this string is present and assigned to null?
Well, it depends on the
one you just do null.
It depends on the store.
So not just
Stores may
JSON.
have a representation for null. Right?
I see. So in a JSON file, I would say null, or if I said 5, I'm going to get back the string 5. I'm not setting strings in my JSON document.
Everything in this JSON is strings, right?
Strings, nulls, and numbers.
Well, fine, but from this particular configuration, it's all you get is strings.
Well, yeah. So that's the thing. That's what I'm a little confused about is.
that index with simplest use cases and square brace, double question mark, and then a default value.
Okay.
So fairly terse, very.
Well, what if the value was, like what if it was actually stored as like a null?
Well, then that means that you use the default value in those cases. If you do care about the difference between storing a null and not having a value, then you need to use that more, especially for configuration that has more specialized.
Yeah.
So really, returning null is just to streamline the double question mark default syntax without having exception handling and targets and booleans and outliers.
So
So
I
the
agree
other
that,
option, right, is to have some method like get or default.
because I agree that it's convenient. The negative is it can surprise some people, and it's different than all the other dictionary-like APIs in the framework.
Like old ASP often had indexing into queries during more form values return.
Yeah, but I'm saying like in BCL, will kind of tend to not do it. But I think maybe that's okay.
I mean, if you want to make it 100% correct, you could just have either an extension method or just other thing that basically says try get value or default, which basically takes in the default value, which I think somewhere in ASP.NET somebody added an extension method to iDictionary that does more or less the same thing. Because it's very common that because the problem is you can't have a nice terse syntax to say if it's not there, give me null. I think it's not as simple as indexer question mark value, right? Which is why a method may actually do.
Initially, we didn't have index and we had get and set, and feedback that we got internally was, oh, just make it an indexer the most per syntax, use it for the most convenient case and the case I'm going to use all the time. And in that case, I don't care for a null value.
Because get is the same as the indexer, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But the current one is doing more.
So this one is gone and this one is gone. And then the idea is that configuration is conceptually a flattened representation, right? So basically, if I ask for a key, I always fully qualify, correct, with all the sections, right?
So, sure, unless you are already using the return value of the exception, in which case it's sort of prefixed with the path-related exception.
I see. So then I would basically only, it's like paths, right? So you would only qualify from where you got it from. Makes sense.
So just to go back to the indexing thing real quick, did you guys consider so I understand wanting to have like this really terse syntax for handling default values. One thing in my mind is that you could structure things such that you have a base configuration builder, which is like a default value source or something, right? And so things chain up to that. They can be overridden through JSON or environment variables or whatever. But then you have in your application all of your default values contained in one place instead of being littered throughout the code with like question mark syntax or try get value. Did you consider something like that? Is it that the default values need to be spread out across a bunch of different components, and so like you went down this method, or?
I mean, they don't need to be. I mean, we didn't decide that that's the default was actually customer just that if somebody was using it in a fairly simple way, that would be the first thing to work with. And if it works for them, that's okay. Adding a in-memory configuration source that has the default values first does work also.
Okay.
But it's an extra step to
You have to define your own and populate it with all the defaults still, right?
Yeah, you need to have code that does that and then add that memory. Sorry.
It wouldn't be magic. You would have to explicitly do it.
Yeah.
But we think you're safe from
The reason my configuration wasn't generic, so it could be strongly typed. So for instance, read JSON, it's 5, that it wouldn't have an I configuration, that was subtyped in.
I think it's that whether or not the backing store is environment or JSON or XML or registry or dictionary or etc. The details of the backing store were less important than the information model being projected. If they can all project to a normalized sort of like path representation, pathing to represent the nesting and string to represent the value, then the rest of the system can consume it in a normalized fashion.
But also, what would be the type parameter? Would it be the value or the key?
Well, the key will always be a string, right?
Okay, so it would be the value?
Based on the value.
But then you have some ints and some strings in configuration values.
I configuration is the bag. It's not a specific value.
Sure. Oh, sure. Okay.
It's like dictionary of string. Right?
But we did talk about like some modifications that we could do in the future. We can read an int directly. So there would be get, you pass a key, and it's an out parameter that gives you an int.
So you would have get int32.
So you don't have to go to a string and then parse it. And
Yeah, right. That's what I was trying to get at. Somehow to strongly type the values.
I mean, you could easily have extension methods that literally just basically plumb it through the standard parsing logic, right? They don't even have to be on the interface. Right?
But then it's not as efficient. Like you get a string first, and then you parse it, and
well, it's more efficient if the baking store has a relationship to that.
So basically, the baking store would have to provide the primitives already.
Yes, but they could. The store can do that right now. They just have to provide the strings for now. In the future, they can expand on that or give the rights.
like if the backing store is a file, and you request an int, we would just read the int instead of going through a string first.
Yeah.
At that point, the backing stores that don't have native integer storage,
They would do the parsing.
they'd have to do the parsing
Yeah,
themselves.
sure.
It's kind of taking the parsing.
There is a lot of value in keeping this.
So there's a question from our live audience that is, colon is a bit weird to use in environment variables on Linux. It'd be nice if the key delimiter were configurable or at least were different for environment variables configuration source. Did you think about that part or?
Yeah, that's particularly interesting. But we might have to have an escape for a call configurable. So something that would be safely
Well, I guess the idea would be that this is transparent to the consumer, right?
Well, it's to the consuming code.
Yes. So basically, you would always request the key using the colon syntax, or whether the source provided is with colon or double underscore. You would basically hide that after you parse it in. And I guess that makes sense.
Kind of like in XML JSON, there's not really a colon. That's representation of the nesting. So at that point, the environment variable would be double underscore would be representation of the nesting.
But I guess that's something that already works today, right? Because the providers are responsible for giving you the keys back, right? So the provider can decide that, when I'm reading environment variables, I treat underscores as colons, essentially.
That's a change that could be made entirely in the environment configuration source.
Yeah. Underscores are also valid in those, though. The only characters that are not valid in a Linux environment variable is null and equals. Every other character is allowed in the environment variable name. When I just looked up right now, it says, according to the open group, name shall not contain the character equals or null.
Although there's probably plenty of.
You might have to escape it.
Yeah, you'd have to handle cases where there's potentially some wonky characters in there that you're not expecting.
But yeah, but if there's a colon in it, like if you want to set an environment variable that has a colon, I'm not sure, but it might require escaping on the command line.
Yeah, the dash command line might be particularly inconvenient to have a colon.
Almost it seems like we should have a set of conventions for the keys, and the sources should always do mappings. Well, not always, but often those do.
So this reload method, did you consider making I configuration immutable and having reload return a new I configuration? Like it worries me a little that you have this thing, like, I don't know, it seemed to me like logically, like this configuration is some, like I build it from the builder, I get this immutable snapshot of configuration, and then I can like share it freely across threads, party on it, do whatever I want. Here, it implies that this object is actually mutable at runtime, which is like a little concerning.
Just as necessary settling the index.
I guess that's true.
What is it? So, but we did this. So we did discuss this at the first review. I don't feel super strongly about this, but I kind of agree with Matt. I think that there would be value in basically saying, here's immutable API I can pass around, and I don't have to worry about components that I don't know what they do with the configuration, changing the properties.
And the other question that I have is like, what is your, like, how do you use the configuration object in ASP.NET? Like, it seems when you use it for the DI subsystem that you kind of rely on the fact that you can access it from multiple threads. Is that not a true statement? Like, I mean, I assume that all the requests would, for example, party on the same service that essentially is baked by the same instance of I configuration. So technically, you have probably multiple different threads reading configuration betas potentially, right? So if one of them decides to issue reload, then how is this going to play with multi-threading? Right, at that point, you may have weird cases.
The way the sources happen to be implemented, the data structure that's backing the information is swapped atomically. So you would see the state change, but it wouldn't be. It would be different.
Yeah, you would either see the old or the new, but nothing in between.
Exactly. So you'd be consistent to that extent. The other thing is that since the application user code component, that would be called as a proof of insight. It's kind of the user opting into having a, which is also why it's intangible. So you can put your logging settings in a file that the user can change, and then refresh that. It is an approach to go back to the builder and build a new configuration. If you do that approach, then you're kind of putting the responsibility back in the user's hands to communicate the new LAC configuration instance up and down the pipeline of creating objects. So it would, you could do that, but then you are giving the person an even more difficult job of how do you spelunk into all of these places which may have kept the I configuration for future reference.
Sure.
And give them the new instance, or kind of like the old configuration system. You almost have to restart the app domain to make a change.
So when you do reload, like, do changes in the builder that I made after I built this thing get reflected, or like does it snap off sort of at that point? Like,
It's snap.
Okay.
Does reload also reload environment variables from the OS? So for instance, if they made a change to the path outside of your program, does it go read the process control block again to get the new environment variables that were changed outside of the process? Because I know on Windows you have to listen for a specific Windows message that says the environment variables will change. You have to go reload them manually. And on Linux, I believe you have to make a special system call in order to reload those. So does that, when you call reload on the environment variables, will it actually reload the environment variables?
It would repopulate its understanding of the environment variables. It doesn't call it an API if something else has to be done to require an environment variables.
Okay, so it wouldn't actually reload the environment variables then.
Because the provider doesn't get a hook into this reload event, or how does that?
Reload is something that's expected to be called from the application code. So
Sure.
the sources themselves won't refresh if the file changes or refresh if the
Sure, I understand that. But when I configuration reload is called, do the sources get some sort of like notification? Like what actually ends up happening? Like, I assume you have a list of sources in the I configuration, and you go through each of them, and you just, or is it that you throw out some cached information that you have so that the next time a call comes in to look up a key value pair, you go through the sources again, or how does it?
the configuration sources that are attached to the default passes to that.
Okay.
It just everybody gets a little complicated. And it's up to the source.
Oh, I have to wait. Okay, I see. Great.
So if there are additional API calls needed to
Sure. They can do the right thing.
that'll be about the environment configuration.
I think that, I mean, regardless of whether it's mutable or immutable, I believe that, yeah, if you talk about an abstraction, you kind of have to put a stake in the ground to say, is this abstraction expected to be multi-thread safe or not, right? For some definition of thread safety. I think completely leaving it to the consumer or to the implementer would be a problem, because then you cannot really rely on that, on a certain behavior, right? The question is, if I actually access a conversion from multiple threads, is this considered a save operation or not? Like, I think that's something that I think should be part of the contract. Otherwise, it's very hard to reason about these things from a library, right? Because you can be used in any given environment.
But it's related to immutability, because if we make this type immutable, then the issue is kind of simple, right? You basically modify everything with a builder or whatever we call it, and then you get immutable instance of I configuration, and then you can pass it around. It's all thread safe. It's basically static data in memory.
I agree with that. The only thing I would say is that you could basically have a meaningful thread safety without being immutable, right? Immutable is just one way to do it. I mean, it has other problems, as Lou pointed out, because if it's immutable, then everybody's responsible for snapshotting at some point. The question is, what should be the mechanism to indicate to consumers that the snapshot has changed? So like you basically just, up to a certain extent, push that. How do you atomically update your reference now? When is the convenient time to the consumers? Which sometimes may be a fine thing to do, but it may not be, right? That's why I think I don't have a strong opinion on what the mechanism should be. The only thing I feel like we should define what the multi-thread guarantees are that this thing gives or gives not.
I agree with your high-level point. I was just saying, by making it immutable, it's super easy and it's very transparent what's happening, and all the threading becomes simple.
Yes.
The moment you go the other path and you say, hey, let's make it thread safe, but make it mutable,
and extend.
It's like such a kind of works. I mean, it's not only like about thread safety, like data races and whatnot, people caching the values left and right, not being notified that something changed. It's like whole kind of works.
Yeah, my gut feels like for mutability, because it's easier to reason about, and these are like, especially these kind of things that you're very likely to pass around.
Remind me, we had a discussion about this. I forgot how it ended. Did we decide to? I remember we had a discussion whether it should be immutable or mutable, and then how did it end?
Remember that we said there's cases that we do want it to be mutable, like the in-memory one. So I think we wanted to keep it mutable.
But I thought we said that we want to support mutating it, but it doesn't have to be through the same API. That was my impression.
I don't remember that.
Okay, anyway. It's something that, would be interesting to get feedback from people in community. And
I think the thing is, like as Lou points would point out, is that if you have the set method, you're kind of closed, right? So like I don't think you can get rid of reload unless you also have set give you back some.
But that's what I was saying. Maybe set is on a different interface. So basically, this is what I'm imagining. There's a app code.
Yes.
Correct. I own the code. I wrote it. I'm the app developer. I know what it does, and I have this API that can both set and read from the configuration. Now I want to pass configuration to a third-party component. Potentially, I don't have access to sources, or I don't have time to look into the sources. I just got a new NuGet component. I can pass this read-only by configuration, and I know that it's not going to change settings of my apps.
Sure, but people that consume that view can't treat it as immutable.
They treat it as readable. That is
yeah. So like you haven't really gained anything, right? It's just like.
Well, those are options. We could make it truly immutable or readable. For those who kind of, the terminology that we use is,
I think I know
readable means
Same.
It may change, but I cannot change it. Immutable means it will not change.
Those questions all kind of come down to like we said before, is it an important scenario to have a system where the configuration can be altered slightly during the running of an application? I think some people might say that was illegal with the previous system. Is that short of rebooting the app domain, you can't really use the configuration system and remain adjustable.
Sure.
We could. It's hard to imagine what it might look like, but I think one of the things we might have speculated on is if my configuration had a notification that a new iConfiguration was available.
Yeah.
The complexity might go up, but you would get that notification, and the previous one could be forced to maintain the previous state. You end up with a lot more code to follow the reload. You know what I mean?
Yeah, though I wonder whether, like, do you imagine reusable components to be actually mutating? I kind of can see how the app, the main app code, would want to modify a setting. Do you think that a reusable component that I just grabbed from NuGet would ever want to write to the configuration? It doesn't know anything about the app.
No.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. To me, there are two scenarios. One is like, I'm the app code, and yes, I want to both read and write. And then I'm a reusable component, and I will only read, probably.
Sure. I mean, that solves.
It was also creating a configuration. If it was Log4Net, if you don't provide a configuration to it, if you write a file, it will read that and then watch it and reconfigure itself.
Correct, but then it has, I would imagine it has its own, it's not the same graph, it's a different configuration instance. It creates a builder, yeah, exactly. So from this perspective, it is now the app, it owns the configuration. It seems like there's an owner of the configuration. I was talking about app and components, but it's more general. It's kind of, there's an owner, they can read and write, and then there are consumers that probably should get read-only access.
But is that an interesting dimension? Because I think the problem that you still have in that world is that even if you're the app code and even if you own it, you cannot reliably change the configuration once you pass it to other people, because you don't know whether they run on multiple threads or not, right? So I think fundamentally, like, I think in ASP.NET, the nice thing is you have startup and then things are running, right? So like doing startup, you know that you're the only guy who touches anything. That's fine. After that, you're no longer touching anything. So that's also fine. But if you have something like Visual Studio where you handed out an iConfiguration object, it doesn't help that Visual Studio is the only one that can actually change the configuration object, because you don't know whether somebody snapshotted something, passed it to a background worker, and now suddenly you swap out the underlying dictionaries, and then God knows what happens to that.
But imagine that this read-only iConfiguration would actually change if the owner changes something.
Yes.
Yeah, you can still have a bug, and you can cache a value and not reread it every time. But I don't think we can prevent it, really. I was more talking about the issue of, a NuGet component should not be changing configuration of the app, because it kind of knows nothing about the configuration of the app. It couldn't be possibly designed to handle it correctly.
True, but
Can't it decide it wants to have some state? If you're saying if it wants to hold it in its own.
Let it save state configuration.
Maybe there's multiple components that have to work together for some reason. This would be a way for them to communicate or share state without having to own on their own.
It's also, two components out there in NuGet communicating with each other. That seems like a rocket science scenario to get right.
Let's have it done with the same vendor.
Well, you don't know.
Fair.
Those inject the same thing they use or something.
It's not that it's not
Should
possible,
edit
or,
information.
it's just in practice. I think it's.
yeah, I think so. I think the two things you said. The first thing is should we have, like, should this thing mutable or be immutable? And the second dimension was, should we be able to basically tear off like an I-read-only view of the configuration object that you pass around? And these are the two things that.
And is it static or it's live? Right? Like you basically, you have the read-write configuration, and then you create a view over it, but is the view live or it's a snapshot? Okay.
Yeah, that would be it's basically immutable or read-only.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't you achieve immutability by just passing in the options object, and you can design that to be the snapshot. So you create your configuration, and then if you want to pass it to whatever component, you create an options object out of that, hand that off, and that object can be immutable on its own.
Well, I guess the options type that you guys have to be writable, right? Because you're filling in the values from the parser, right? So they cannot be technically be immutable unless you use an action and you digitally populate it yourself according to the constructor, right?
Yeah. The options are they're not actually recreated every time they're accessed.
Yes.
So they would freeze unless told to change it. So that would be an example of where they wouldn't be affected by reload.
So they would be effectively immutable in that sense, but the technical type would have properties with getters and setters, I suppose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, is there a way to get the keys of an I configuration?
That's a good question, actually.
And then my other question is, like this I enumerable key value pair get configuration section that takes a key. What does that do exactly?
So for the first question, those are the functions that you would use. And there's like Diego mentioned, there's something.
Yeah.
So get child sections would be the second two.
Okay.
So one way you could walk the tree is say it gets out child sections because it'll return the keys that are the immediate, located immediately at the current location.
Yes.
Just the portion up to the delimiter.
Okay.
So not a deep recursion, but a shallow
I
recursion.
see.
And so that would be the key part of the key value pair.
Okay.
So in that way you can sort of like walk like a registry API.
Okay. But how do I get like perhaps I'm not understanding, like how do I know, is there a way to know the values of things I can put in for key in the indexer that will return non-null things, like that will, or the key such that try get always returns true, like the strings in this section, you don't have it.
It's basically, it's not to get the subsections or folders underneath, but the values at this level for this configuration, the enumeration of values at this level.
They're fairly quick.
Or this, you get the same list.
That's the same.
But then
like in registry, this child keys are also the child things that you can get the immediate value from. Does that make sense?
No, so imagine that I have an I configuration object.
Yes.
And when I call the indexer on it with foo, I get back bar. Is there an API that tells me foo is in this configuration? Am I using the get, the get configuration sections returns in I enumerable with the string foo, and what is the I configuration object that comes back? This or?
That would be a configuration that's, when you enumerate them, it would be a child configuration rooted at foo with the prefix.
I see.
So basically the algorithm would be you would call get configuration sections and you would look for keys that don't contain a colon.
And so then the I configuration that comes back from that thing is empty because there's foo as a value.
It doesn't have shipment.
Yes.
Okay, I see.
Sorry if that's not immediately intuitive. It's not really a system designed around the difference between. It's not a system that has the difference between like a folder and a file.
Sure.
It's more like a path and a value.
Yeah.
So if you walk the path, you're getting down to the point where there's no more subpaths. But that path has value.
So that we are renaming the configuration sections to get children, not get child sections.
Okay.
Because that makes it more understandable.
So which one are you adding? You're adding the child.
Get configuration sections so we can get children.
Or you just rename it.
The overload that takes a key, that's like a prefix.
Yes.
That can contain a semicolon, sorry, a colon, I guess, right? Because it's anywhere.
Yeah, get the children immediately under that.
Do we call it hand key?
So if there was like a two keys that started with F, and I call that with key of just F, do I get back both those keys, or how does that? Like, imagine I had like foo and faz as values in here, and I call get children with the key of F. I get them both back. The enumerable that comes back has two elements, or
When you're passing a path in, it should be finding things that match where the path segment is complete. It's not a partial.
okay.
It's not a partial segment match. It's not a strict prefix.
Okay.
It's assuming that you passed in one or more segments.
Okay.
Find everything that starts with those segments.
Okay.
And then return the distinct values.
But I could pass in like either foo or foo colon bar and get back. Like if foo and there were a bunch of things under foo, I'd get everything that was under foo.
But if you passed in F,
Yeah, I would get nothing.
you get foo back because you don't actually have an F. I think there would be value in having a stronger model of folder versus value, like differentiate between the idea of a folder name and a value name in something that's sort of string value. Because we didn't go that way because it's a model of string value.
Right. I don't know. To me, it like is more. To me, it's more approachable. Just like intuitively, right? Like the idea of like, well, I have either values or I have subsections, right? Like, it's weird that like keys are. I don't know. It just maybe I have to think about it more, but it's just a little surprising to me.
But when you have like complicated configuration stars,
Yeah.
I agree with you. But I think majority of them will be super simple. They will be just key value pairs. They won't be actually deep structure, correct? In our basis, you will just have a bunch of key value pairs.
Oh yeah, for the larger part. And even if there's structure, that structure is sort of representing improvement.
Yeah.
But you still consume them as if there was a conflict.
But I mean, in that case, to me, it seems even weirder because like if the default case is like I just have a bag of, I have like a section with like 20 keys and values in it, all no necessary. Then like the way that I know what keys are in there is by calling get children, which seems kind of weird.
But I also think that you would very rarely enumerate keys. You need to know what the keys are. Like enumerating them, what can you do?
It's a
You can
different
just
scenario.
show them, display them. You cannot actually do anything useful with them because you don't know what they are.
Well, maybe
What is it?
It is a completely separate scenario from what the application we expect the application to be. Is basically you want to create a browser for configuration or something that's going to reflect the configuration. It's an interesting scenario, but it's not what most applications are going to do. They are just going to ask, give me the value for this key, and it's going to be hard-coded in the application.
Well, I'm just thinking like you're in the debugger, right? I mean, what would I do to actually just find what's in there? I mean,
like a visualizer.
yeah, I mean that's probably the first thing. I mean, when I get a dictionary, the very first thing I do is I check what's in there.
But then it is generally okay for that kind of code to be a bit more complex.
Well, I would say on the debugger, it's actually kind of not because it's already kind of hard to do anything in the debugger. So ideally, you just want to hit a plus on something and you just want to get to this essentially.
By the way, I was not saying that we shouldn't enable the scenario.
Yeah.
I think you asked, what do we think is more important? Priority. I would say the priority is simple set of values.
It seems like it should be kind of like the iDictionary, right? Like this is my immediate reaction is if iDictionary can say give me the keys, give me the values. My immediate reaction to seeing this is essentially it seems like a wrapper around a key value store, which is iDictionary, so it should act exactly the same way. Let me enumerate everything I can.
just implement iDictionary. Like,
Or it has many.
iDictionary is so heavyweight with the keys and values collections and stuff.
Yeah.
The part that I The part I feel is
I
that
think a
it's strange.
keys property would be useful.
Like, if it implemented IEnumerable of like string, key value pair of string. And that was just kind of the flattened complete hierarchy. Like, is that like rooted at this I configuration? Is that useful? I don't know. Like,
But like if you wanted to
It
write,
helps the debugger.
Yeah, because you can literally just plus the type and you get basically a flat view, which I think is actually pretty useful.
Yeah, I agree with that. That would be very nice if in the debugger it was very visible what's in the story.
and you can do link over and stuff.
It's pretty cool.
You should this, right?
Yeah.
this would have to completely walk the entire configuration tree though. Which if you have a registry thing in it, it might be.
Well, I mean, building this thing is going to have to completely walk it.
My point was that if you have a lot of keys in it, having a full-on flat list might be too much information that you can't use. Whereas if it was per level, maybe that would be more interesting. It should be pretty much expanding the get configuration sections. Or like that's kind of the same thing, but it's structured.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So if you expand get configuration sections, fine, you can't just really do that in the debugger just with a plus, but that would give you the first level of them, and then you can just drill into the ones you care about, versus getting a full flat list of everything, which the debugger doesn't do very well to, at least the VS debugger doesn't do very well to display it. So.
I think it's Christoph kind of alluded to, a lot of these cases will be very finite in scope. Not even as large as I in web config even today, because there were things that are configuring systems would be in it. Like IIS modules are not configured in this way. So it's a lot more along the lines of settings and less about things like the information we have to provide to a framework to make it work in the first place.
Because you would expect that to be code essentially, right? In the new model.
For code or or like the IS modules. There's just so much data you have to provide to get these things to work by default that you miss it.
Yeah, I think nobody in this team wants to go back to that.
That's the reference in the default template, but in the we don't have one key.
Which is what?
Connection string.
Oh, that makes sense.
So one thing I was trying to understand, so some keys can return high configurations themselves, something the sub collection. So what do you get if you try to index into that key? So there's like a key that has like a whole collection of values. What do you get when you index into that?
The best way to think of it is probably to imagine, in those cases, imagine different cases like an environment variable, where you have those kind of things.
Mhm.
So if you have an I configuration that's version, and you say, enumerate the sections, and you say full. If you have, if you take the return value of that, that I configuration has to agree with. So it will basically sort of add food to all the other API calls you make. So if you use the indexer, that one will automatically add food color to the key when it goes through to the root one. So in that way, what you would expect if you then enumerated food, you would see bar and that is unique values. So bar would have the value 42. But it would also be child section, and child section would have the value also and child 3. This is where it kind of makes it difficult to really have a strong line saying that what is a value versus what is a section. Because in terms of string, it's restricted to the prefix. That section. Okay.
So if you have this like root configuration object and you index foo, what string does it return?
5.
What if there was no 5?
No.
Basically, at each node, you can have one value and multiple children.
Just similar to the registry, because the registry has this magic default entry, which is basically representing the value for the folder itself.
It's interesting that the eye configuration doesn't have an API to get to the value of this node. It only gives you the children. So basically, you need to go to the parent node to get the value.
Yeah, that's actually really unfortunate. If you know that your child section and you know that there's a value where you are, I think you can pass an empty string to the indexer and get the value at your current location, which is terrible.
Text already.
I think that's largely not expected that you would drill down into a child section and then try to get the value that is the only thing in.
It seems like could you add like name and value to each eye configuration? Like it's you get an eye configuration back with foo. Could you say what is my name to say where I am, right? So if you're in a loop, you can say where am I in this in case I want to break on something.
In the JSON,
So if you can enumerate keys, you might want to say, if I get to this certain key, skip it. But how do I know which key,
Okay.
If I was going to do it that way, I would just go like full on with the abstraction. Like, everything has a key and a value, and everything just has children. Or it doesn't have children.
To the empty node.
If I was going to go
I
there.
like that. And the root would have an empty name.
So what would the change API was? Is it just behavior changes then?
Basically, I add key and value as properties to eye configuration. So basically, when you are on the eye configuration that presents, let's say, food, you can read 5 from it without having to go to the parent and read food. And you can also know that this represents food.
Interesting.
This instance of eye configuration represents food.
So the key in that case is the thing gets prefixed on all of the lookups, and then the values, whatever's at this node.
What would
what
so what does it mean for Baz in that context? Would it be would the key be foo colon Baz, or would the key just be Baz in that sense? Like, is it relative, or is it basically fully qualified then? Because that may be ambiguous in some cases, right?
You could make an argument for both.
Yeah.
I would call them as more information.
Yeah.
But if you were just,
But it does change the feel of the API. To me, the API today, it's a flat list fundamentally. The fact that you can get children, they are kind of like subsections of the flat list. What we are now talking about is changing it to be tree first. And I don't know. I have no opinion which one is
I guess
more important.
that would be my preferences personally, because I think this is trying to be both like kind of like JSON-ish and like the registry-ish. And it seems like the registry everyone talks about online is like this old archaic thing that has all these issues. So it seems kind of wonky to me that we're trying to rebuild some of this functionality in something that is fundamentally or widely considered to be kind of broken. But then also add some of the niceness that JSON provides, which is a lot of the new APIs that are coming out. Of like, yeah, JSON is a great way to store configuration files. So I think it'd be really helpful to not violate least surprise and say, let's pick one, right? If we're gonna be like the registry, then let's go all out like the registry. If we're gonna be like JSON, then let's go all out like JSON. Like let's pick a way of accessing and talking about this and stick with one instead of trying to meld two completely different fundamental differences and come up with something weird.
I mean, one option that we have is you could just say, get configuration sections. You could literally make it an enumerable of eye configuration section, and that thing could basically, it could even extend eye configuration and literally just give you additionally the key and the value, because then you can say, if I get an eye configuration, I essentially point to the entire tree, and I can treat it as a flat list. But if I really want to, I can walk the nodes and I get logically back sections from that.
So how common do we expect this scenario to be? Like, it seems like we're re-architecturing this for a scenario, like I don't know if it's going to be very common that you have both a key and the set of children at the same root.
Yeah, I think
But if we support it, you should be able to fully support it, right? If we're gonna say we support that scenario, then we should really fully support it in both debugging and logically thinking about it.
Fair, but my question was how, like, do we care that much about that? Like, is it something that it's a major or streamlined scenario? Because if it is, then yes, we should redesign this, but
Well, I think the answer to that would be like it's the same scenario that would make you call back configuration sections today.
yes.
You're reflecting.
Yeah, like if you
Yes, but
remove that method altogether, I would agree with you. But since the method is there, the question is, so there is a belief that there is a valid scenario there. The question is just like how usable is the API given that scenario? Because you're losing information at some point.
It's a good idea if we have the key property, then you can just have an IML configuration and get children.
Yeah, that's true.
The first string isn't necessary if it's unknown.
And what would the key return if you have? Oh no, never mind. Sorry.
On the root, it would be
Yes.
And when you have in this example that we put up, if you have a configuration rooted at foo baz, it gives you back just baz or foo colon baz.
Well, I think that was still the question. Which of those is less surprising, I guess.
So to me, foo colon baz is less surprising because then the mental model is the full key is always my prefix, which is the path to this configuration section, plus the thing that I pass into the indexer, which is the suffix.
Yep, I agree. That makes sense. So you're opposed to adding the properties in directly? Because I mean, results in that type.
If I understand correctly, we would basically change the collections that are being removed from get configuration sections to be just enumerable of iConfiguration, and then iConfiguration has a key, right?
Yes, this one would. So I think, yeah, it probably is worthwhile just creating that shape. If we can actually agree on that. We have today. What we would basically do is we would add string key, which would be get only. We would add string value, which would be get only. I guess it would be get set, be consistent. And then this guy would conceptually be now of this, right?
I think
No, just
that would be string, but that was before a lot of this conversation.
Yeah, that's like my question. I mean, in that case, it makes sense to just return
call
it.
the get children method to get.
Yep. You could enumerate the thing, that would be its children, right?
Well, it would be like that, right?
That would be a little bit less friendly than a debugger because you would sort of need to leave through nested.
Well, I guess it depends, right? If the two-string of iConfiguration gives you a key value-based syntax, then the usability will be the same, because if you expand it, you get essentially a bunch of key values. It's similar to dictionary.
That would
Right?
look good in the debugger.
Yeah.
I think so too. The key value, and then you expand it, and it has more key values under it. Those.
No, but do you want a tree in the debugger, or you want flat view in the debugger?
If it is a tree.
Because if it was string, it could return those 4 entries of key and value. And you would see those. If it returned iConfiguration, you would sort of like receive the 1 entry for who it would be. Open
I see.
that, and then
So you're saying basically, if we say this is iConfiguration, you kind of expect it to give you the trees, meaning the immediate nodes only.
I would think so.
If you make this one, you would expect it to be flat. Interesting.
so what would value return if you don't have a default value? Would it be an empty string?
No,
I mean,
to be consistent with the rest of the API.
That's kind of weird because you say at this key, give me the value. It's null. Oh, but I have to go and get the children. There's no indication that I have any children, right? Because if in that example, if you don't have foo, you only have foo bar and foo baz. If you give me, like, if you get the configuration for foo, then you say, okay, what's the key? Foo, what's the value? Null. That's not, I mean, it's true, it's correct, but it doesn't help you find the other ones. You'd have to call, get configuration section.
If you are reflecting to find out all the configuration, you call get children anyway.
Well, yes, in that case, you don't care if you're doing that in a, if you're displaying it, you already know what the parent is. You don't really care about, hey, what am I looking at right now? Because you would know. Like you could maintain that state outside of the API or outside of the implementation if you're doing a traversal or display. Like you don't have to.
Sorry.
You don't have to maintain the state inside the configuration if you're just traversing it, because you could have that state outside. Not saying it's ideal or you may want to do that, but if the scenario is to traverse it, we can, like, it's not too complicated to do it outside of the API with what we had before. Maybe adding.
So you mean add key but not value?
No, I'm sorry. Not even have key nor value.
That's one thing I'm kind of wondering, that for a JSON file, you can't have a key, a value, and children. It's impossible to put that in a JSON file.
True, but
you
that's
either have children
specific to
or a
JSON,
value.
right?
See,
But there is a common denominator.
The data model that you present to the user and how it's reflected in a specific.
You could mix two,
Store,
yes.
right.
Configuration, so you can mix.
Yes.
You can have an environment variable that has foo. You can have a JSON property that populates anything underneath foo with other properties.
And if you were to say like commit, where would it go if the only thing you had was a JSON and you set one of those?
Well,
We want it to be
yeah.
savable, and you can't save that to JSON.
Can't save what? What is the
That.
This,
Like that structure, you can't produce that with JSON. If you have some kind of weird object with a name and children, but then the syntax would be horrible.
And it's not.
There's another option available that's even more horrible.
Encoded?
In some ways, is if you just
Oh, you just serialize it. You just serialize the whole list. Yeah.
So you can.
But it wouldn't round trip, right?
That would round trip, I think.
No, it would, but you wouldn't round trip to the same places it came from, right? You like let's
Yeah,
assume
it wouldn't look the same way.
It's not incremental benefit.
like it wouldn't work. You would have the thing that came from JSON is just the last three, but now when you just say if you add one more that didn't actually come from the JSON, so you wouldn't fully round trip, load and commit.
Well, I'm just saying you had no choice. You had to use JSON and you had to represent something.
Yes, you can.
Could we? I mean, my question is, what are we aiming for by having a key that can have a value and children? Is it to allow you to get values in the registry and have those be there next alongside everything else? Or so, for instance, if we took away the ability for a key to have children and a value, would that be a problem with the fundamental data model, right? Like, because then if you load from the registry, you could still have what the registry doesn't have, a quote unquote default, which then normalizes it. You don't have the JSON problem, you don't have the INI file problem, you don't have the XML problem, you don't have a problem with the registry. Everything kind of works then.
But I think you're designing from like you're saying this is the API that we want to have.
Mm-hmm.
These are the implications for the data. I think where they came from is the data is a flat list of paths and values.
Mm-hmm.
Forget about this being a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this as paths and values.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's now design an API that lets you read it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they arrived at
Right.
what we have right now.
Right.
What you're trying to say is, oh, the API is kind of strange. Let's just remove the ability to have some paths. But then it's complexity on the other side, because now you have to explain to users some paths are valid and some are not.
But the other question is, how would you enforce it,
Right. And if you want to be able to commit, you have to be able to commit to all the different data types that you're reading in.
I agree that there's this problem. I would solve it by not letting people to commit on this interface. And basically, because committing and saving is so store dependent. Like we were just talking about on Linux, there are some limitations of what you can commit to the store. Reading, you can always read and map to whatever we want.
Right. I guess I brought that up because this, to me, immediately looks like a hierarchy. I realize it looks like paths, but to me, it looks like a hierarchy. So if it looks like a hierarchy to some people and it looks like a path to some people, well, we're going to have some surprises here. So I just think that if we're having this, we're going to put this out to a broader audience. We really need to nail down if it's going to be passed and it's going to be passed, we should go down that route. If it looks like a tree and we're going to act it like a tree, go down that path.
I agree. That's the top level decision, kind of.
Like I think the biggest use case is you have a JSON file that's config, and you override a value or two with environment variables. Like I think the more important part is the tree aspect, not so much a list of paths. Because you're looking at a JSON file, you're looking at an XML file that has a tree structure.
Well, I mean,
That's what you're editing. I mean, in any file, they all have the same kind of structure.
I agree with you on the conceptual aspect of it, but I think practically when people actually write their apps, they don't care about the tree anymore. Because when you actually read, you only care about, I want to set this background color. The fact that I chose representing a JSON file with as a tree structure, at the point where I write my app, I no longer care.
And
So
also
I think at the consumption side, I think the thing you really care about is the flat list.
And also like registry, you mentioned registry. It's kind of a tree except for the default value that makes it to be like this set of
But even
values.
registry, like if you look at how people use the API, nobody traverses the tree. What you do is you say, HQLM get open key, you put in some path, and then you on the result you say give me the value for key X. Right. So technically you're just indexing into it as a flat list. Which begs the question, I mean, what happens if you would remove those instead? Would that result in problems?
I think the scenario for these is I now want one of the groupings and then I enumerate, for example. If you remove this, you kind of
have to parse it now.
You have to enumerate and then filter out.
I think a section is necessary, at least for the configure part.
I would not to get children.
Get children is not.
Yeah, I would
You don't know if
keep
it's
one
a section of that point. You know that it's not configuration. You know that it's a section.
I would agree. I think it's more logical too because they're conceptually overloaded, right?
I guess if we're gonna have the concept of sections, then it immediately to me it immediately becomes a hierarchy, right? If you can say get me a section, then that becomes a hierarchy to me. If you don't have the ability to get section, then it becomes a path based thing. So I guess that's the question, right? Do we want to be able to say give me this subset, and if so, then that seems to become a hierarchy.
But if you look at registry, it has both, right? Is that fundamentally a problem?
Right, and that's one of the problems that people talk about with the registry is are we trying to emulate the registry or are we trying to emulate a configuration system?
I think the answer is kind of both, right? I mean, because basically you're saying that we coerce multiple different data sources to something that happens to somehow match what registry does, but you don't necessarily emulate the registry on the APIs because registry can do a million things that you don't want to need.
But this is doing a bunch of the problem that the registry has, right? We're introducing the same problems that the registry, people talk about the registry having. Be it true or not, it emulates some of the problems. So
But I don't think that's the main problem with registry, that it's both tree and the list.
Also,
I mean, there are many, don't get me wrong, there are many problems with registry.
Yeah.
This one is not something that I would say I've seen.
Also, I don't recall many complaints about the API share of the registry. Yeah. I think once you have to read the registry, I think our APIs are actually pretty decent. I mean, the biggest problem that people have with the registry, I guess, when they actually parse it, is the fact that they have to parse the values.
But
you have a bunch of overloads that doesn't make it a bit easier.
You could also hide away the complexity of the registry or the way that it's doing it in the source. Like the registry source could hide away the fact that you have that default value and return or populate it with a parens default, whatever you want to call it. That would make it look like another, like you'd get away from the value of the root that way, and then.
But from my point of view, it doesn't do with the registry source because, as you said, it's a conceptual model that is true whether you use environment variables or INI files. Right?
Yeah. So at each level, like each configuration source could make sure that it does the right thing. And then the one we're talking about right now was the registry, and it can get rid of the default thing, and all of them by convention could have the default thing for the root if that's what you want.
I would just question whether it's worth it, because if you basically expose this particular API, you can represent it at full fidelity without having to normalize anything. And the default case where somebody just says, give me a configuration, I index into it with a fully qualified path, I get a meaningful result back. So why would we care?
Goes down to consumption.
One would expose it. What do you have value? No. All right, then.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. I'm just saying that fundamentally, you most often interact with it as if it was a flat list.
Yes.
And occasionally you loop through it, and not really because you're looping through a tree, but just because you're looping through what are the names at this point.
Do we have use cases already in Codebase for the get section and get child, get children already? Like, how are we using it right now?
It was the configure call.
Yeah,
which was that section.
Yeah, because you have to point to a subsection for the parsing. You need to drill down there.
Does it? Does it?
Because
it could go
if you have a bulk object that has children, it will try to populate the bulk.
So it's not just for the properties. We need the properties from the object.
So you change the first method to get child.
Based on what
it's
it
kind
said.
of like, I understand why you did it.
Why don't you like it?
Because when it said get section, it was more self-explanatory.
But
It
you don't
corresponded to the usage model, then not to the shape of the data.
The problem is that you don't know there is a section. If it is just a value, you are going to get another configuration.
I see.
Well, that's one aspect. The
By
other aspect
section, we mean a bunch of children.
The other argument that I would have is it's a new term that the other APIs don't use. But if you would always use get configuration or get sections or get section, I think what I don't like is like the asymmetry there where we call one a section and the one we just call children. It seems weird.
Yeah, it's just, you see, like going back to the flat list versus tree. So in all ASP.NET, it's kind of technically it's a tree, but it's encoded as a file with a bunch of sections, and then they have values. Suddenly, I have to do mental model mappings from what I see in the file, which is a bunch of sections, to oh geez, I know that they parse it and put it into a tree now.
I'm fine with that too, right? I mean,
but it's a trade-off. I agree. It depends. What is your story? If your story is fundamentally a tree, you probably would prefer terminology to be get children.
Yes.
If your story is a flat file with sections, you're kind of like, geez, I guess they could have created a tree out of it, but.
Personally, I like the section terminology because it reminds me of RNI files, which is probably the right mental model to have.
I don't like it because they are not sections. They could be sections.
True. But this goes back to what Andrew said earlier already. If you get the name 80% right, they keep it. Because the remaining 20%.
Not even 80%. You just can't know. You just don't know until you check whether they have a value.
True. Well, it depends on the definition of a section, right? I mean, you conceptually can still consider it as a section that has a value but no children, right? I mean, it's just.
So what if we call it get group?
Yeah.
Because group is kind of like, it can imply either a section in a flat list, or you can say like children is a group.
They are icon, so it returns icon configuration.
What is it?
Configuration with key prefix.
Configuration.
That is very.
Which goes back to the name is too accurate, you probably doing it wrong.
So like we're solving the same thing. Like, did we close on if we want this a tree or a path based? Like, we need to just nail that down, and then the rest of this will kind of cascade away. So, what do you think? Do we want to make this path or hierarchy?
You make it sound like there's either or. I would say that I think what I heard was that they decided to have both.
No, but they should support both.
Should support
But
both.
what is the like? If somebody looks at the API, should they think tree or a list of paths with maybe potentially with some one level grouping, right?
What I said earlier, like I think the answer is like depending on how you want to use it, you use some of the APIs, not the others. I mean, you can use it either way.
That would get personally, I would hate that. That would get so confusing because I wouldn't know which mental model to use. Like, what do I use in what situation, right? Like,
But the thing is, like, you should just take the registry APIs that we have today, right? That's the same thing.
Right. And personally, I don't like those APIs, and that's why I'm bringing this up, right? Like, I personally, I don't like registry APIs. The fact that you don't know it's conceptually not similar to any other type of system, in my opinion. So that's why I'm bringing this up. Is if we want to say we're going to do both, fine. Let's just agree on that, and we can move on. But if we're going to say we're going to make it path based, then let's make it path based. Like, let's just nail something down, and we can move on to the next logical step from what we've nailed down.
What does path-based mean? I mean, path is, if you think of file system, that's a tree. So what does the file? What does the path?
I think that basically what you're saying is that the mental model you should have is that the key is sort of like just a string with colons in it. And the key is that, and then the value is singular at that location. And then you have a flat list of both. That's your fundamental way of thinking about it.
So I say you don't call the tree.
Right.
And this thing is to make it convenient to navigate and to make it tree-like in some cases. If you want to make it tree-like, the only concession you need to make there is utility method, like get sections, which says, given this much prefix, what comes next?
Basically, subset the list.
Yes.
That's what it kind of does.
Yes. It's a subset that goes one more delimiter out and then does it distinct.
Right.
So what would that look like? Basically, would that mean literally just remove?
Yeah.
It's wouldn't have.
So I'm confused.
So at any point, right, you can say, give me a view over things lower down in the path hierarchy.
Right.
Yes. By this prefix, essentially.
Right.
Yep. And you still need the index.
Yeah,
What's
and
the
it's-
index for now?
That's those two.
Sorry.
What we just said, that thing where you say, given a prefix, what is there? So
Yes.
The indexer is
that,
when
that is the definition of these.
the indexer is when you want to actually. So this select gives you one or more values, right? Like you can say if you have a config rooted at the root of this document here, and you say get sections of foo, you're going to get back something that has 4 elements in it. If you index,
3, right?
no, because you'll get
RMS.
if it's rooted at the top. If it's rooted at the top,
Okay, so if you were at the top.
and you say get sections foo.
Okay, so we're at the top. You say get section foo.
Yes.
So you're asking for the distinct, unique values directly under foo. So you would get 2 entries back, which would be bar and pass.
Bar, okay, yeah. And okay, you don't get an I configuration with an empty key.
Correct.
So I
So that's
agree.
why the
And then what,
answer is not.
interestingly, I knew that you don't get the empty one. I thought you're gonna get basically the last one as well.
Yeah.
Because you're getting all paths underneath.
Remember, that's the difference.
Immediate distinct paths. Because when you get, because then you'll get back an I configuration for bar and an I configuration for paths. And then you can ask for a bar, square braces.
That's what I
But
thought too. So like from what we were discussing, I thought we were gonna get three entries, all 3, except for the first one, which was not a subsection. Subsection.
I think the configuration would have all 3. It would just, when you index bar, you get the 2. Like it would have another
No,
child
but
section.
if it's a list, then you don't.
Or maybe you are talking about a different API. I understand that get sections would return to, but the indexer, can I index into bar, comma, what's the last one?
The index returns a string. I don't
What?
understand what it would do.
What's the last one? Bar
Quack.
or quack? Can I index into bar quack after getting full?
Should be able to.
I say get
Well-
section full, and then can I index into bar quack?
Yeah, you would get it.
Okay. So I'm getting 3 values here.
So the one prefix there, you can say,
I just basically get a subset of the paths. That's it.
So, but if you don't, you cannot get a like configuration for foo, the value, then we lost the ability to enumerate the values that are on the second level. You can only enumerate sections, but not values.
Right. We never really had a strong start for writing things which were actual values.
I think it's a desirable feature.
There was a proposal. There was a proposal to basically allow empty string. I mean, it's a bit obscure, but it would solve the problem. You can index into empty string and you get the value.
The only thing that you're addressing there is if you have a section which is a bunch of named strings or named integers.
No, but if I want to see, if I have a full bar as just values under a like configuration, how do I enumerate that I have those?
It's not immediately obvious, but you
Use enumerate the configuration object.
can, you can ask for the sections and use the dot value property at this point. With that change.
I think you just said that get sections won't return values, won't return entries for values. It will just return entries for descendants that are also sections.
Yeah. Four levels down because I never have to. But now, in order to do this, you kind of have to because you need to have the full flat list up front.
Why would you have the full flat list up front?
Because how else would you? I mean, how would you do it otherwise? You need
But
to,
if you have the registry as the backing, you can ask the registry what you direct children on. You don't have to write the whole thing.
I suppose that question is what entity of the method configurations are. So you may need to jump back to double check.
Yes.
Next couple of minutes.
Well, before we go there, like, I mean, at least an agreement of like that's the shape, or if there's anything else you want to change here.
Target value maybe instead of target.
Target value would probably be a good idea.
Is there a difference between calling get sections and passing in a key and calling get section with that same key and calling get sections on it?
Sorry, say it one more time, slow.
Like if you call get sections and pass in a key,
Yes.
is that any different than calling get section, passing in a key, and then calling get sections on that return value?
I think the answer is yes, because I think we should probably rename get sections the argument because you're actually looking for a prefix, right?
Parent key is what we decided. It's what we call.
but that was.
The net result will probably be the same.
If the net result's the same, why have the second get sections?
Yeah. Well, because the second one can use multiple values, right? So that may not be.
No,
you may get more answers, right? So
You still get a mutable from the calling them.
yes. So, but yeah. So the question is, if I call get section, I get back a single configuration.
Yes.
If I find somebody with that name, right? Now, if there's multiple that have that as a prefix, the second one would give you back all three of them, right? If you then call on the first one get value, yeah, the answer should be the same result.
Right.
That would be my understanding.
Because from what I've heard, the plural get sections with a key goes through that prefix first, and then finds all of the sections under that prefix, right?
Sure.
Then if you call get section, it gives you the entire configuration with that prefix. And then you call get sections on that, and it gives you all the sections right
It
underneath.
is two ways to get to the same thing.
Two ways.
The one that takes an argument is a shortcut to say, right, go directly to this level, give me everything there's under it.
Hard time mapping that in my head right now, but that's probably.
So just throwing this out there, but what if we remove all the get sections and just made the indexer return it?
So you index and call value.
Yeah, if you wanted to get the value.
That
It's
seems
like
to
filling a
hurt.
hole.
They use it.
Yeah.
We can also provide the names.
Okay.
So
Version of the indexer.
should you get an I configuration from the indexer?
That'd be
And
going
you
like
you have to do the
full
value.
I think I would agree with Matt. That would make the canonical use case awful. Because now you have to deal with nulls. You would have to, like, it's not what you
That's what
want.
question marks for, right?
Well, no.
No, because you have to dot value.
You question mark dot value, question mark,
But
Yeah.
no,
So it's,
There's lots
well,
of question marks.
I'm
in
not
that.
sure that.
that
Well,
also
you-
ties into a specific.
Well, with the new C# picture, it's not as ugly, but I would still say like the
Yeah,
user
still
case
not
is
that.
not as obvious as you want it to be.
Or you make the thing castable to string. Oh, you can't.
No, it's small.
So to me, these are just like wrappers around navigation of a tree. I think that's clear.
Yeah, I
For
think if
example,
you
get string, get section, or get sections, and
so if you remove those, I think the result is essentially it's a flat list, and the mental model that holds up. I think probably with these guys as well, right? If you remove all of those, it's very obvious it's a flat list, right? So the way I would see this is, well, it also gives you these, which basically allows you to navigate the structure. But it's an optional thing. You don't have to use these APIs, right? You can literally just treat it as a flat list. And move
I can see removing get sections with a string key if you wanted, because it can be
This one?
expressed in terms of the other two.
that's kind of what
And it could be an
I'm
extension method or something.
And then what might make more sense is get children.
Yeah.
Because it's doing something that's kind of fundamentally different than that one.
you would call this get children.
Yeah, the first is just for doing a configuration with a deeper prefix.
Yep.
And then the second one is immediate. Okay.
But if you get child, then it's like a section. That's right, it's saying get child. Because you can get the actual child value based on the indexer or passing the get section. So it should just for naming convention to keep it.
IDB should be the type.
And then we just remove reload and call it I3.
A string tree.
What?
I string tree.
No, I tree of T.
For T string.
That should never design APIs. Are we then happy with that shape overall, or is there any more concern? Because then we can move on to the other APIs in the remaining 17 minutes.
Like in section instead of get child. I really think that it's section instead of get child.
I thought they were.
Yeah. Long get section.
Because you could pass in foo colon bar there.
Yeah.
It would give you back an I configuration that had a value of 42 and then one child of.
But what's the definition of section? Because that could return to something that's not a section. That's what I said earlier. Like, it depends on what you define as a section. Right? If you just define it as a prefix of a bunch of pages, then that's.
So I assume if you called get section on this document rooted at the root, if you called get section with foo colon baz, you would get back an I configuration that has no children, key of foo colon baz, and a value of 79.
Yes.
Yep. And where's the other section?
Well, the reason I say that is because you said get child is food column bad, and it wasn't your child, it was a grandchild. So get children, those are your children. Get child, it's not your child.
It's a bit very. Yeah.
It's descendant.
But it's, yeah, maybe it's also. Yeah, it's not a section.
But again, I would say like if we were for we are designing tree API. You want to make very generic names and so on and so on. You probably want to make it generic type parameters. But it's like this API started very specific to configuration. It used configuration terminology that kind of you look at the API, you immediately know what's going on. And we kind of are pushing it to be a very generic tree. Maybe that's okay.
We want to make an actual tree thing.
Or you could take this kind of. It's a terrible word, but I can't think of anything that needs the same thing. That sounds good.
well, child and descendant are kind of like synonyms in a sense.
The child sounds more specific to the child.
That's true.
If there's an in section, if there's like an XML that's like a named section with that kind of thing.
I
I'm
get
not
that you
saying
can
it's right. I'm
No,
saying
I-
it's probably the wrong guess to call.
I get that you can use it to get that if you want.
Yeah.
You don't know what. Anytime you call this method, you don't know that whether it is a section. And you are just taking a live configuration that is descendant of the one you are sitting on.
I mean,
Another idea.
that's in line with what Link does, right? Because if you say nodes, then it's the direct one. If you say descendants, then it's the indirect one.
So another idea.
It seems over the top. Like, I actually like the reverse shit more.
I like that.
What if it was a like just a name that implies subsetting? Not because get section or that it's a tree. What if it was a subsetting operation?
I don't think of it as subsection, as subsetting in that context. Because I think if you call this API, you no longer have the mental model of flat list where you want to extract a piece of it. I think at that point you kind of expect to deal with.
In the implementation, we use the word focus. It's like there's a configuration focus concept. It's internal implementation of this, but we say if you, it's kind of a subsetting idea. We can create the configuration focus that is basically a child that focuses on these subsets of the key space, let's say. But I don't know if it's
It wouldn't be my mental model, but I'm open for that.
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful with making the API very generic, but very difficult to use. But you could imagine that it's basically a query. It's like select. You almost think that like link select passive.
I mean, honestly, like if you look at what Roslyn did with the syntax tree APIs, they basically have that, right? Because basically, you can either enumerate the direct children or all descendants, and they flatten it for you. And they have various flavors where you can do that. Like if you want to go all in on that one, that's fine too. But then the API would look fairly different. Maybe worth exploring how that would look like. But I think we should probably move on.
Make a configuration on it.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Yeah. At one point, it was get sub key. Also, I just thought I'd mention it. If everybody thinks it should be get child and get children, I think get children is better than get child sections.
So you're proposing this with this one being a child?
I think get children is good because if you see get children that returns that configuration, you'll guess what it means. My only feedback about get child is I don't know if you guess why you would call that. That's but if I'm in that already, I'm leaving that to
I don't know. Maybe that would indicate that you can actually get something deeper.
Yeah, that to me seems like you could do a select. To me, that seems like you could say this document get child and then foo : bar.
Which my understanding is you can.
It's relative, right? It's relative to where you are.
Well, I mean, pass office.
I thought it was just the first.
Oh, that's
You,
this
you,
one.
this one you can, okay, you're right. You can select deeper.
But honestly, if we are talking like descendants are not children. Children are immediate in a tree.
But which is
So
what
this
this
method
does.
is not get child.
Well, that one, yes, but not that one.
That one gets.
That's more, can be anywhere underneath your.
get descendant.
Dot in that.
What is that?
I like get section.
Yeah,
What are you
I think
trying
this has like the worst kind of compliment you could make about API is that it's technically correct.
Yes.
Mathematically correct.
Exactly.
I like that section. Like
All right. It's actually is it.
Even if you're talking about the tree, you can call sections of a tree, right? You can kind of it's stretching a bit, but it's not wrong.
Yeah,
It's not completely wrong.
that's technically correct.
One last thing, is the indexer now redundant with the value?
Yeah, but
the indexer you can use to go deeper.
The indexers are like a shortcut for like get section and then value.
Dot value.
So it seems like the bottom stuff is for like for navigating, the tree, the path structure, and the top is sort of like the easy, like grab me this value, or this path.
Yeah.
We're trying to get it.
So the only thing, I like the interface now. What about the reload method? I mean, reload without notification, is it useful? When would I know to call it?
Should reload this be on a different interface that you pass in like an iConfiguration? And say reload this reload from this subtree or something like that, or the configuration source, or like
the problem, right, is that like if like when you program against this, the question is, do you need to write your code, like code that queries a configuration? It needs to be written in a way such that you never cache values, right? Like you have to always keep asking the configuration over and over again, did something change? Because someone could have like arbitrarily called reload.
Which actually nobody has been messed up.
Right.
Because they move it into the options strongly typed. At that point, you snapshot it. Right?
Does it actually snapshot it?
Yeah,
It does.
it has to, right? Otherwise, you would have to create a proxy type that literally hijacks every single time you access a property.
And like, I get the fact that like the change notification is hard if this thing was immutable, but like it seems like you essentially have a similar problem today because you're basically forcing all of your consumers to never cache anything. Like I sort of wish that we would like solve the how do I notify a bunch of different components that this thing changed and they need to like rebuild their view of the world separately from how do I represent a configuration document.
So let me ask you a different question. Like, how do you use reload today in ASP.NET? Do you even call it at all? So is there any app scenario that you have where people actually do that? So how does that look like?
You're right, we're good watching the notification channel coming through here. So if you have a subsystem which was capable of reconfiguring itself, it would have a rational way of knowing when it should do that.
Yeah, I think my question is like, considering that you have this option API that sits on top that's snapshotted at some point, like what happens if the application actually does call reload? I mean, none of these things will be reloaded. Right?
So if there were options that were informing something like the MVC framework, they can have the resting on these objects and the framework itself would need to coordinate and it's going to re-understand the world. So it's not as simple as it's kind of in very simple systems. Just pick up the value as you go, or having a call that you can make to let it know when to reload. It's all like reapply. Yeah. So reload is broken. Would there be an event mechanism on iConfiguration that would be a better way of being given the new instance of iConfiguration if you want to opt into that?
Like, could you instead do some sort of like it seems like the source, I don't remember if I'm using the terminology right, the thing that holds, the configuration builder, like it seems like that would be sort of the thing that I would want to subscribe to, and then it could just push to me new configurations, the immutable objects as they, when someone says, reload or whatever.
But that's the one that you don't want to pass to the components. This is the one you want to pass to the components?
Yes. Yeah, but then you subscribe on the builder to changes. And then when change happens, you push new configurations to the components. The components have to have a way to say, you have to, no matter how we design it, you need to like somehow pass something to the components to either they observe the changes or they need to accept new configurations. I would say it's simpler for them to basically have an API to update the configuration. It's equivalent logically. You have to do it somehow anyway.
If they subscribe for if they ask for, if they attach an event or something, you don't have to know they exist in order for them to get configuration changes. If you have to push changes, you have to know each person you need to push changes to.
Somehow you gave them the configuration, so you need to know.
Well, if the configuration's in DI or something, or it's the options model, then.
But you could have duplicate code if each one has to register for the same events, right? So if you have four different components, each of them has to register for the exact same event. Each one of them has to do the exact same reload call, which would get expensive.
Well, they wouldn't be calling reload anymore.
They would.
No, I think
They
like
would be
the builder
They
would
would be informed when reload
yeah,
is called.
when the event is fired, you get a new I configuration.
Yeah, all they do is recreate it.
Yeah, what do folks think about this particular pattern? We would basically have an I configuration which would be immutable on that level, and then you would basically have some representation, but that's the right terminology or not is not the thing I care about. It's basically you would give people an object where you can ask what's your current configuration, you can subscribe to the minute this ever changes. And then whether you construct this thing from out of thin air, or whether you literally just set a property, or whether you reloaded the thing from the source, they all become the same operation. You just update current, and everybody else just subscribe to the event and they'll sync to the latest version. And if somebody holds on to an I configuration, this will never ever change.
I prefer a model like this.
I honestly like that too.
So are the I configurations still mutable? Like you said, the values.
No, it would have to be immutable at that point.
Yeah, so then the question becomes like, how do you use this to update configuration? The setter could return a new I configuration,
Yes.
right? And there could be some on source you could then
Yeah.
call the setter on current.
Because the other problem that you have is like ignoring the immutability aspect for a second. The nice thing is things become atomic by construction, right? If I want to set two values and I don't want to ever to have somebody see that there's only one value there, the best you can do in I configuration is to make every mutation atomic, but you can never group 5 things and make that atomic, right? Which is one of the problems of our
Plus
old
you get
collection
a
types.
lot of notifications if you go through that. You get like 15 different objects flowing through the system and you won't care about the last one.
Yes, that's true. That's true too.
I'm really a fan of the I configuration source just because it means as a consumer you have to choose which of the two interfaces. And if you were, well, there's also an interface called I configuration source, but that doesn't matter. It's easy just to take this interface and keep using current and still be wrong. You haven't done the step of opting into.
Yes.
But if there was an event handler on I configuration that was configuration changed, then you could opt into that and then just reassign your member field to the new instance.
So I agree with the detailed pushback, but do you agree about the kind of fundamental architecture of this? There's the master, the read-write master, and then there are immutable
Snapshots.
readers. And then the master basically does all the notification and will design the API such that they are hard to misuse and give them right names. And then, there's some application or the component that actually uses the master would basically coordinate all the changes to consumers.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the question I ask is, does that master remain the builder? Like, do you keep that around?
Yeah.
Or does the builder return well,
Yeah.
here's that configuration, here's that configuration. Immutable one.
Yeah, those are.
Probably I configuration
It
too.
still doesn't change the conceptual problem that you brought up though, right? Because you fundamentally have 2 types.
But I think you fundamentally have 2 concepts.
Yes, and I mean for the DI system that means you have to choose.
Yeah.
Which one do you import?
The one that you would pass around the DI system is the one that's the I configuration. That's fundamentally immutable, yet potentially you can ask for its.
But that's the problem, right? If you pass around the immutable one, how do I get the later version of the snapshot and how do I know?
You subscribe to the event.
The event
Where
has
does the
to be-
event sit, right? It would have to be on the same time.
Yes.
You would have to make it the same time.
But can you ask the DIs? You cannot ask all DI systems to update. Correct. Once something is injected, you cannot say re-inject again. Like in math, we had you can recompose, but some DI frameworks don't allow you to do that.
Which is why you shouldn't pass around snapshots in the DI system. You should pass around the thing that can you get the latest snapshot.
But if you pass the snapshot around, you will get the one that the application was for. And then if you subscribe to change notification, and it has changed, that fire will be. So whether you.
Why wouldn't you?
You catch the event if a change has occurred ever, you get a notification.
So the one you
So I
from
get that
DI
part, but I mean, like, I think my question is, like, how do I get a handle on this guy then? Like, are you proposing that these guys essentially sit here?
Why not just pass it the I configuration x86?
The event and the event arcs would have the
I see. Basically, it's
I configuration.
just say it for now, just to understand what's going on here like that. But did we get that instance essentially? And then the idea would be I would basically just update my basic field that I guess every source got for that.
You get a new one, you'd have to resubscribe for event change on the new one as well.
Yeah, because it's immutable. You'd have to.
You have to re-hook up the event on a new one.
Yes.
And unsubscribe from the old one.
Yeah.
And
So what are the
I'll keep piling on things.
Yeah, exactly. It seems really complicated. Where you get a new one from this event, you have to unsubscribe from the old one. You have
I
to.
kind of like the mutable with the change notification better.
It's like, I guess I
You
still
like
like,
the readable.
Well,
So
yeah,
for
readable.
You like the read only that can
Read only
change
that changes underneath you, and you get a
But
change
you cannot
notification
change.
saying
I guess I don't.
that it's changed.
Because if you do want it to be available, then you probably do need to. Yeah. You probably do need to things that haven't asked for update probably still need to.
And Mac still has the problem with suddenly you cannot cache values.
Like,
You cannot cache values.
You can just expire your caches when you replace the configuration instance.
But then if you replace configurations, it's the issue that he was talking about, which is now I have to resubscribe to the event to the new instance.
Yeah.
It's painful.
That's how you make it readable.
No, but that doesn't solve the other problem. That only solves the consistency problem. But if anybody caches, they have to know when their cache is invalid.
Yeah, which you still have the event. It says it changed.
No, but no, we're going in circles because the problem is that the event itself is very awkward to deal with on the same object because you don't have to resubscribe every single time the
No.
event fires.
Because the object wouldn't change. It would just be saying, my state has changed. Update yourself.
Refresh your caches.
Oh, I see.
Oh yeah, you just call reload inside the event.
Well, you call reload, that triggers the event. That tells everyone the current configuration has changed, read me again.
I prefer a separate object, like where you have this event that you can listen to. There's this current thing that is updated. So if you write your code such you never cache and you always just .current, you're fine. If you want to cache, you can subscribe to event. And if you want to just like tear off some immutable thing, just .current once, you get a completely immutable object and you're good to go. It seems weird to me to put an event on this iConfiguration interface because it isn't related to configuration. It's related to orchestration of some other thing changing this object out from under you. So
It's related for the configuration changing.
Well, I mean, this is essentially what we used to have in the old system. I mean, you have object models that you know when they have changed, right? I think the fundamental problem with this model is you never get immutable snapshots. You always get something that may mutate at any given point in time. I think that's fundamentally the only difference.
I know. Do we believe that the scenario that the system that can be configured itself at runtime is a mainline scenario, like everyone is going to be doing that, but we're trying to enable everyone to do it automatically? Is it kind of a super advanced thing that you need to do more complicated things to get to it?
I mean, I think it's a super advanced thing. Like
It's super advanced and nobody gets this right. So I worked on MEF. We added this feature of recomposition. It's impossible to create a system that actually works based on some events and recomposing trees of value settings. I mean, it's like
I think the two statements that I would make is that multi-threading is becoming more and more popular because we have async operations. And whether you're technically multi-threaded or you just offload some things, I think you have that problem. So you need to deal with the fact that what happens if things change underneath me while I'm running my code, right? That's the thing everybody has to change with, and that's not as sophisticated scenario.
For many applications, it's okay to ignore the change. I mean, if they didn't prepare to reconfigure themselves at runtime, anything change, well, I need to restart the application if I want to get the changes.
honestly, the way I would design it is reusable components. They need to have a way to say, my settings change, here's a new one.
Yeah.
And it's an explicit API. It's not some magic, event that you subscribe to.
You opt in to use it, right?
My settings change, go use the new ones.
But you opt in to use it. You keep the original thing that many people are going to be using, which doesn't do that, super simple. And then you opt in to that complexity when you really want.
But the biggest weakness of the existing configuration configuration system is just not there. So there's no opting into it really here.
Yeah. No, I
Like the enterprise library application block. I mean, we sort of like welded on to configuration and really fought against it because it didn't have that idea of being mutable intrinsically. So you don't need to use it all the time, but if it's not there, then.
But what's the problem with the orchestration? Matt called it like the object that does the orchestration, basically saying, here's a new configuration. Now, if this change, and you're now responsible for updating whatever state you have, but it's an explicit API that you call.
You still have to push it to everybody.
Yeah, you have to push it, but it's explicit. It's not there's no ambiguity what's happening. Whether the component needs to have a method, set configuration,
right?
And you pass new one of those. Versus an event, like you pass iConfiguration to a bunch of APIs, who knows whether they subscribed or not. And then when you have a tree of complicated objects, the worst thing that can happen is some updated and some didn't because they forgot to subscribe to the event. When you have a set method, well, you better implement correctly the set method when somebody gives you otherwise you have such a obvious bug versus not subscribing to an event. It's not such a
So basically, the consumer of the configuration would need to implement an interface that has a set method. That would be.
Not even that, just have some way of getting a new configuration.
Well, it has to have some way to get.
What if you have two components that implement that do the same thing? One needs configuration, one doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
You only have access to that component through one interface that doesn't have a set method.
Well, then you can.
Unless it implements a different interface and you cast and try to cast, and if it works, set it.
If you have an interface that doesn't let you set configuration, you couldn't set it in the first place. Therefore, you cannot update it. That seems normal. But there's an issue with DI. I agree. I think the DI is a bit of a throws a twist into it because suddenly you need to have.
Well, it's not DI. Like I think the fundamental problem is it doesn't compose. Like regardless of DI, like even ignoring DI, like I now have to say, like at the app layer, I now have to know everything in the system that ever wants to reconfiguration, and these are the guys I need to update.
But if you don't have DI, that's true anyway. The moment you have starts, you need to pass configuration to everything that needs
it's not true because I can construct an object, pass in an I configuration where this guy is passing the configuration on. I don't have to know.
Oh yeah, but you can still do the same thing when you update. So let's say you just have a reference to the first root, correct? And it passes configuration later. Well, when you now say, hey root, I have a new configuration, well, it needs to implement the set method to update its settings and also pass it to the things that it passed before.
You learn about each of them individually. Like, what is their API?
Now everyone needs a set method.
What?
Even if they don't use configuration themselves, they still need a set method because they need to be able to call through to the things they depend on. If you're gonna make it like that, where you call the root, it calls the things it depends on, and you set recursively like that, you still have.
But when you don't have a DI, you need to have this anyway, right? Because to set the first time, you need to have those set methods.
Yes. Well, you gave them, you set them somehow.
Exactly.
You pass them in as constructor parameters or something.
So yes, if you don't have a
DI,
you need to transitively pass things down the tree. The moment you have a DI, you don't have to, but then you have all these problems that we have.
I think your tree is much simpler if you're not using DI, because otherwise you'd be using DI if your tree was complicated. Like if you're going to make a very complicated object tree and you're not using DI, well,
correct. So what we are saying
it's
is
going to be more complicated.
Yes, I agree with you that that's why people use DI in a lot of cases.
Yeah, so I think we should wrap up because we are way over time now. So I think the key point here is that we need to make a decision whether we want this thing to be mutable, immutable, and if it's mutable, how does chain propagation generally work? Right? Like
I think those are orthogonal. You can have immutable and still have change propagation. It's just you need to get a new instance.
True. I think all I'm saying is we need to solve like immutability and change notification.
Right, do that. Yes. Do we want two interfaces or just one?
I think it's whatever works.
We'll do one with like the configuration source that has the event and gives you the configuration, or do you want the configuration to signal there's a new configuration or I changed?
These are the design points of either solution, right?
Also, I think we should separate kind of largely design from small API feedback that we would like. I think you almost should choose how far you want this to go, because
Which part of it?
like I feel like we are completely redesigning what they came.
I think
came
what
up
we should
with
do
from
is
the
we should just
get-go.
take the minor feedback that we have so far, which I think we agreed on what the actual shape is,
Yeah.
which is still very much like the original, right? It's mutable, has a reload method that's largely unchanged. And then on top of that, somebody should make the decision how to deal with immutability versus mutability,
Yeah.
and then what our change notifications. I think that should be, what I would do. And then we can do one more pass on the remaining things which we didn't tackle today. Does it sound fine, everybody, or is there? No? All right. And
I think mechanical changes to the interface are fantastic. Solving the change notifications is necessary. It'd be disappointing if solving change notifications and kicking out changing.
If you change the file underneath you probably want to reload the data, right? User perspective. Like,
For the systems that can do
I go and because like you can already like replace code and it will just rebuild, right? I think not being able to replace the JSON file and have it reload.
And nothing to prevent a logging system that you can't actually change the setting without rebooting the app.
Or even
I share the notes and I share the annotated div. All right, guys.